Hello and welcome to Queen of Quirk. In today's video I am going to be sharing 10 books or plays or stories or mainly novels that I studied at Trinity College Dublin, which I think were the best. My top 10 favourite books from Trinity. So stay tuned, I hope you enjoy the video. So if you're new to my channel, my name is Jane. Hello, welcome. I am a student in the dual BA program between Trinity College Dublin and Columbia University in New York City. The nature of the program means that I only spent 2 years at Trinity and I'm now third year or junior at Columbia, online, temporarily. I have not finished my English degree yet, although fourth year is eerily close and I have a lot more books to read until I graduate. But I thought I should dedicate an entire video to the Trinity half of my degree and to books that I studied, loved, went to lectures for, waffled tutorials about. I really loved the courses I did in first and second year. Obviously I loved some more than others. I think it's really valuable to get a really foundational education in English literature before you branch out into specific topics, so it was really cool to get a huge range of genres and periods. Now I know exactly what kind of things I like to read because I was exposed to it. Here's a little disclaimer. I absolutely love the Gothic. So there's a few texts in this that are Gothic themed or have some kind of supernatural stuff going on. I ranked these texts by two factors. First, how much I just enjoyed reading them, just like surface level, like did I have a fun time reading it? And then the second thing, which is a bit more important than the first, because these books, you know, I did study. The second factor is like how much did I enjoy studying them, reading about them, writing about them, going to lectures for, going to tutorials for. So that's the bigger factor. So let's finally begin with number 10. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. We did a whole module on Dickens in second year. Fun guy, talented guy. Bleak House, a bit too long. So by looking at the essays I write for certain modules, you should be able to tell what books I love from those modules. So I wrote an essay on Great Expectations, which is a Bildungsroman, coming of age kind of novel. In the essay I wrote, I focused on the grotesque and I looked at two characters which I thought were super interesting, Abel Magwitch and Miss Havisham. Gilsey has a favourites video for like books that we did at Trinity, and Great Expectations is one of them, and she also mentions that she loves Miss Havisham. So here's a little abridged excerpt of my essay. Pip compares Miss Havisham to a ghastly waxwork and a skeleton in the ashes of a rich dress, and when Pip first meets Abel Magwitch, Magwitch gobbles food ravenously and his throat clicks ominously as if he had works in him like a clock and was going to strike, like a cartoon character. Dickens generates an expectation that the characters will be villainous and or comedic. Yet Magwitch and Miss Havisham of Great Expectations are far more complex and interesting, and as we learn more about them, we feel more sympathetic towards them through the eyes of Pip, and we learn that there can be more to the grotesque than meets the eye. Next, number 9, is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is a weird one for me, and if you read my blog post about my favourite TV shows of 2020, you may be shocked to see The Turn of the Screw was kind of low on the list because I talked about how I decided to watch The Haunting of Bly Manor because of this book. Yeah, it is kind of low. And I think the main reason it's kind of low is that it's not one that I enjoyed reading as much as I hoped to or thought I would. The writing I found a bit confusing at times. You know, I think it's because it's like a modernist text, like we did it for our modernism module, so fair enough. Then I went to the lecture and I learned more about it, and I was just so intrigued, so I listened to like an audiobook version. It was a bit better, but I mainly love this novel. And as you know, there's two factors in my little decision making here that I just loved studying this. I thought it was such a fascinating book to study. It's like a classic Gothic horror text. It's about a woman who's pretty innocent. She goes to this manor, which is pretty creepy. She meets some kids who are pretty creepy, some ghosts, they're pretty creepy. You know, classic Gothic stuff. But what I love The Turn of the Screw the most for is how applicable it is to one of my favourite theories, tvestan Todorov's The Fantastic, which is so interesting to me. It's I could go on about it all day. Basically, critics of The Turn of the Screw argue a lot over whether the governess actually sees the ghosts or not, like are the ghosts real or not. But I kind of lie in the middle of the argument. I don't think we're supposed to know whether they're real or not. I think we're meant to be in the middle. I actually mentioned this in the essay I wrote. I said that the mystery of the governess seeing the ghosts can never be resolved, and so the ghosts are both real and figments of imagination. The Turn of the Screw debunks the objective communal reality by infusing the supernatural into the stream of consciousness of an unreliable narrator, proving perceptions of reality can only be subjective. Number 8, yes, number 8 is a play, Angels in America by Tony Kushner. So this is actually one of the first few texts of this pile that I read in lockdown. I have the pleasure of saying that 2 of my favourite actors ever have played Prior Walter in productions of Angels in America, and they're 2 Andrews, Andrew Garfield and Andrew Scott. It's such a riveting play to read, so much to take from it. So many layers. It's basically centered around 80s America and it examines the AIDS epidemic and homosexuality in the 80s. There's dream sequences, there's characters that intersect into different plot lines, there's angels, supernatural, magical realism stuff. It's just jam-packed with humor, tragedy. So I read this for my non-release writing module and I had an exam for that class, and in the exam I talked about this book and it's defying of the bury your gays trope. So what I said was, in 80s America the media further pushed the gay community to the margins, making them essentially unsaid and unseen in theatre and in film by stereotyping and allocating them to tragic plots. Tony Kushner's Angels in America challenged the hopelessness of earlier narratives such as Martin Sherman's Bent. Kushner's play uses magical realism to trace the unseen gay community and subverts the gay anti-hero narrative. So it's a gay play. What else do I need to say? That rhymed. The next book is not that long at all. It's actually that long of this entire anthology. This is an American literature anthology from 1865 to 1914, and I have a good few of these American literature anthologies and they're fantastic. I love them. It was actually a book that was in 2 of our modules in first year. One, genre of the novel, and one, the awakening, sorry. American genres. The essays for those 2 modules, which was just 1 essay for the entire term, I wrote both essays on the awakening. It just has a special place in my heart. It was one of the first books I was like, ooh, this is like kind of my thing. The story is very bleak. It's beautifully written. Its imagery is really vivid and colourful, but it's poignant. And I actually have a printed essay, because in first we had to print out our essays, we didn't send them in on our computers. I wrote 1 essay on like the theme of awakening and the awakening, you know, it's in the title, so it's obviously a big thing. And I wrote, Edna's realisation of her predicament is the start of her awakening from the life that her position and the expectations of Louisiana society would have for her. In her summer at Grand Isle, Edna loosens a little the mantle of reserve which had enveloped her. The character awakens from her simple acceptance of the domestic way of life as the only way to live. She wants there to be more to life than motherhood, something more exciting, out of bounds perhaps. Next, number 6 is actually short stories, Shirley Jackson's short stories. So you also may be surprised that Shirley Jackson is kind of, it's not that low, it's in the middle. Why isn't she higher? Because I ranked The Haunting of Hill House, the TV show, as like my favourite TV show of 2020, and honestly I can say that it's probably one of my favourite TV shows of all time. Love that show to bits. But I actually have not read The Haunting of Hill House. It wasn't assigned to us in college and I have it and I'm going to read it. It's on my to be read pile or list or whatever, so I will read it at some point. I have read Shirley Jackson's short stories. What we did read for my non-realist module was 3 stories. The Story We Used to Tell, The Bus and The Beautiful Stranger. And they're each just wonderfully written and they're each so equally disconcerting and disturbing. Shirley Jackson is just this writer that really knows how to make you uncomfortable. I wrote my exam essay for this module. I wrote a bit about her short story, The Beautiful Stranger. And it's about a suburban housewife whose husband comes home from work or from somewhere and she doesn't really recognize him anymore, becomes a stranger. I wrote this in the essay. I said, Jackson's The Beautiful Stranger confronts the feeling of purposelessness experienced by housewives in 50s America, but through the forms of the domestic Gothic. The domestic Gothic is like my favorite thing. The story does not feature any dark castles, monsters or poltergeists, but rather the extraordinary confinements of a heroine that stands in for ordinary confinements of women's lives, which Eugenia C. Delamotte describes as Gothic. Number 5, we are in top 5 territory now, and number 5 is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is such a fun read, and it's a classic Gothic romance. We got a woman who's pretty innocent going to a mysterious manor, Manderley, and she's seduced by a man, Maxim de Winter, and they get married or whatever, and she feels threatened by 2 forces, one being Maxim de Winter's previous wife, Rebecca, and his weird housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers, who's probably my favourite character in the book. It's also digestible and it's just, I really like Daphne du Maurier's writing. In my essay, I touched on the Gothic. In Rebecca, I wrote that the narrator's first arrival at the estate is fairy tale-like, the road an enchanted ribbon through the dark and silent woods. Yet when first presented in retrospect by the older, more mature narrator, Manderley is a place of terror, a sepulchre. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but will do. A sepulchre where her and Maxim's fear and suffering lay buried in the ruins. From the very outset, the reader is set on edge, knowing that there is a sinister past in Manderley's future. While Tatiana de Rosny may dismiss the many female Gothic traits by refusing to classify Rebecca as a Gothic romance, those traits are central to Rebecca's success as a tale of an all-consuming jealousy and its murderous consequences. Next up, number 4, we got our first Irish writer, and only Irish writer. It's James Joyce's Dubliners. James Joyce has a special place in my heart. I just love Dubliners. I think it's such an interesting collection of short stories that kind of gets the heart of Dublin, and obviously I don't live in Dublin in early 1900s, so I wouldn't know that kind of vibe, but I got a vibe. Dubliners is a collection of like 15 short stories. They're all about people in Dublin, obviously, that are kind of stuck in stasis. And they have some kind of Joycean epiphany, which is kind of a moment of realization that's very Joyce. And they're all kind of connected, each stories in some way. I love so many of them, but some of my favorites would be A Little Cloud, Counterparts. Clay is probably my favorite, but I think I'm a little biased because my lecturer and my TA, like he was the same guy, he dived a lot into Clay. And also The Dead is probably the most well-known story, and it's really good. I just love how the stories are connected by the themes. And I wrote an essay on it. I'll read a little bit from the conclusion. We have Hugh Kenner writes that Joyce wrote most of Dubliners less as a sequence of stories than as a kind of multifaceted novel. It can be difficult to connect the dots between the stories with all their allusions and inferences to see it as a multifaceted work. To help us see its interconnectedness, the motifs are effective and powerful. Dubliners is Joyce's nicely polished looking glass, reflecting the paralytic lives of Dublin inhabitants, and the interrelationship between these inhabitants' stories still resonates with readers today. Number 3 is Macbeth. Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth. I will say it again and again because I'm not in a theatre, so it's not bad luck. The Scottish play for all you theatre fans. I hope I'm right with that, by the way. Anyway, Macbeth by Shakespeare is so good. So good. It's definitely my favourite Shakespeare play at the moment. Like, that can change because I love Shakespeare. And when I was in school, I obviously did Shakespeare, and I did The Merchant of Venice for junior cert, and I did King Lear for leaving cert. But Macbeth I studied for the Shakespeare module I did in second year. We did a few plays. Quite liked The Taming of the Shrew. Kind of a weird one. Like, does Shakespeare hate women? I don't know. The Scottish play just wins that module, you know, and it might win as one of my favourite Shakespeare plays ever anyway. Of course I love it, you know. It's full of the supernatural, full of witches, it's full of ghosts, and there's murder. I will say though, I actually did kind of know of Macbeth before I studied in college. I did a monologue, a Lady Macbeth monologue for a drama exam a few years ago. If you were to read any Shakespeare play, like read it, I'd recommend this one because it's one of his shorter plays. It's fun, it's just crazy and full of supernatural, so highly recommend. We're in top 2 territory now. These books are pretty special. And number 2 is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Think of Frankenstein, okay? You know, you think of the green monster, don't you? That's what I thought of anyway. Maybe I wasn't a very informed student going into my first college year. I hardly knew anything about the actual book. So Frankenstein is not the monster, but he also is the monster. Mary Shelley achieved so much with this novel, and she kind of wrote it for fun. She was literally with her friends over summer and they were telling each other ghost stories, and she decided to write this one just for fun. That's what she wrote it for, and it's a masterpiece. It's about a scientist who creates life. The monster, does he have a name? It's been a while since I've read it. I actually read it, like I finished it 5 minutes before my tutorial on the book, so it was one of just the most satisfying reading experience I ever had. It's also so philosophical and has such interesting like musings on human life and the meaning of life and everything, so it's not just all spooky. It is also studied as a birth myth of genuine originality stemming from Shelley's tragic experience with motherhood. I have the number 1 right here. It's by Sargasso by Jean Rhys. It was a book I did for post-colonialism. I actually read near the end of second year. We were in lockdown. I never had a proper lecture on it. I got slides and I had discussion post-tutorial, and I did a practice essay on it, and I just realized I loved it. But it's a pretty sad book though. Jean Rhys, she wrote this book kind of as a response to Jane Eyre, which I have right here actually, and I have not read. So I actually talked about Jane Eyre in my essay, in my exam essay. It's kind of essential to talk about Jane Eyre when you talk about Sargasso because it's kind of a direct response to it. But I have not read Jane Eyre. I will soon. It's another classic Gothic novel, so I've got it. Basically, Why Sargasso takes Bertha Mason, the kind of deranged mad woman in the attic in Jane Eyre, and gives her a backstory because Jane Eyre says that she's a Creole woman. You know, Jean Rhys as a Creole woman herself, she felt, you know, this is wrong, so I'm going to give Bertha Mason a voice. And she is Antoinette in White Sargasso Sea, and Rochester, the famous love interest of Jane Eyre, comes to the Caribbean to marry Antoinette. He's not named in this, but we all know it's Rochester. It's an interesting study of colonialism, and Jean kind of writes back to the Empire, the British Empire, kind of takes back her narrative of as a Creole woman. Let's see what I wrote in my essay about it. This was for an exam, so I said, the reincarnation of Bertha as Antoinette restored the humanity and dignity of the Creole woman, showed Rochester as the corrupt colonizer, and aligned Bertha with the slave rebels of the Caribbean. Rees found how to write back to the Empire on behalf of the colonized Caribbean peoples. It's a beautiful book. It's sad. A lot of this stuff I talked about today are really sad. There's a lot of death. It's just the powerful stuff, you know? But there were so many more that I didn't get to talk about that were so great, but they were the ones that just stood out to me. I wrote essays in every single one of them, so that's a testament, as I said earlier, to how much I love them. Because I took a bit of a break from English, I'm getting back into some English classes now at Columbia. I kind of missed it, and I'm getting back to reading. I'd love to make more book content if you're interested. Tell me below what your favorite books are. If you studied at Trinity, maybe tell me what books you liked. So yes, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more book content, more content about college, whether that's Trinity or Columbia. Make sure to check out my other videos if you're interested in studying at Trinity or Columbia. So yeah, and like this video, subscribe for more, and I will see you all again soon. Take care. Goodbye.